The wind was dry that morning, dragging dust across the plains like a whisper of old secrets. Jeremiah Grim McCall rode alone, as he had for most of his life. His hat was worn, his boots cracked, and his heart even more so. He wasn't looking for trouble, he wasn't looking for anything. He just drifted from one patch of dirt to the next, mending fences, moving cattle, and keeping to himself. That was until he spotted her, near a dry creek bed, under the broken remains of a wagon, sat a girl no older than 9. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks hollow, and her dress torn. She didn't cry, she didn't beg. She just sat there like she'd been waiting for the world to forget her. Grim slowed his horse and tipped his hat. "You lost, miss." The girl didn't answer. He dismounted, approached slowly, and crouched down to her level. "Ain't gonna hurt you. Name's McCall. Most folks call me Grim." Still no answer. Then, after a long silence, she whispered, "My name's Joe." "Where's your folks?" "Joe, they were taking me west. Wagon got stuck. Bandits came." Her voice was flat. "They shot my pa. Ma told me to run." Grim swallowed hard and looked around. No signs of life, just broken wood, dried blood, and a little girl with nowhere to go. "You got any kin?" Joe shook her head. Grim let out a slow sigh. He hadn't taken care of anyone since the war. He barely took care of himself, but something in her eyes, a quiet fire, like she hadn't given up even if everything else had stuck with him. "Well, Joe," he said, standing, "you're ridden with me, for now." Joe didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded. He lifted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her. As they rode toward the small town of Dry Hollow, Grim didn't yet know that helping that girl would change not only his life but the lives of an entire town, and maybe the whole county. Because Joe wasn't just an orphan, she was the key to a secret buried beneath years of silence, shame, and greed. And those who had tried to bury it weren't done yet. The town of Dry Hollow sat crooked on the edge of the frontier, like it had been slapped together by drunks with shaky hands. One dusty main street to saloons, a sheriff's office, a rundown general store, and a church that hadn't held a sermon in years. It was a place where time lingered but never really moved. As Grim McCall rode in with Joe sitting quiet in front of him, heads turned. Folks didn't look long, they never did when it came to Grim. But enough eyes narrowed to let him know he was being watched. A cowboy riding into town with a skinny, wild-haired girl that didn't belong to him, that was bound to stir the pot. He stopped outside the livery, where a boy no older than 16 stepped out to take the reins, water her, and feed her good, Grim said, tossing the kid a coin. The boy caught it, eyeing Joe with curiosity. She stared back, silent as a rock. Inside the general store, it wasn't much warmer. Miss Clara, who ran the place and had the sharpness of a hawk, looked over her spectacles at the pair. "That child yours, McCall?" "Nope. Found her by a busted wagon out near Dry Creek. Her folks didn't make it." Clara's face tightened. "Poor thing." She stepped around the counter and crouched near Joe. "You hungry, sweetheart?" Joe gave a single nod. Grim cleared his throat. "Need some clothes her size. Blanket too. Maybe some boots if you got 'em." Clara gave him a long look. "That'll cost you." Grim dropped a pouch of coins on the counter. "It's worth it." As Clara moved to gather supplies, Joe whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Grim didn't look at her. "'Cause it's what ought to be done. World's full of folks who look away when they should lean in. I ain't perfect, but I ain't blind." Joe said nothing more, but her shoulders settled just a little. They spent the night in the room above the old stables. It smelled of straw and old sweat. But Joe didn't complain. She curled up in her new blanket, her tiny boots sitting neatly beside her. Grim sat near the window, cleaning his rifle. "You ever Shoot one of those? She asked. Plenty. Did you ever kill someone? He paused. Yeah, during the war. Since then, only when I had to. Joe didn't press. She stared at the ceiling like she was counting the wooden boards. Then she asked, You think the bad men are coming back? Grim turned to her. You see their faces? No, I just heard the shots. Then screams. I hid behind a rock. Then no, they won't know you lived, and even if they did, he nodded toward his rifle, they'd have a real hard time getting to you. Joe nodded and pulled the blanket tighter. The next morning brought more stares. Grim ignored them. He went to the sheriff's office and gave a full report. Sheriff Ellison, a balding man with a belly that had long since taken over his belt, scratched his head. Bandits. Huh, another wagon hit. That makes 5 this month. Same group, Grim asked. Could be. No one's seen them up close and lived to talk about it. Grim clenched his jaw. What are you doing about it? Ellison sighed. I've got 2 deputies, both green. Can't cover every trail. We're stretched thin. Grim didn't say anything, but the look in his eye said plenty. When he walked outside, Joe was sitting on a bench, clutching a small paper bag of peppermint sticks Clara had given her. She looked up as he approached. Are we leaving? Soon, but not far. Where to? There's an old shack north of town. Used to be a trapper's place. Nobody goes there now. We'll stay a while. Keep out of sight, just in case. She nodded again, like she understood something bigger than herself. But neither of them knew what was coming next. That same night, under the shroud of darkness, a figure rode into Dry Hollow. He didn't stop at the saloon. He didn't check in at the livery. He went straight to the sheriff's office and left a folded piece of paper under the door. On it was a drawing, a crude sketch of Joe, and a bounty marked with $500, dead or alive. The trapper's shack lay at the edge of Thorn Ridge, a craggy bluff with jagged rocks on one side and a winding trail barely wide enough for a horse on the other. It was half collapsed, roof slanted like a drunkard leaning against the wind. But it was hidden, and hidden was what Grim needed. He had stocked it with flour, beans, jerky, and firewood after stopping at the general store for supplies. He didn't ask Joe if she liked the place. He just said, We're safe here, and started patching the roof with old tarp and rope. Joe stayed quiet most of the first day. She watched him work, then helped sweep out a corner of the shack with a broken broom, carefully laying down the same blanket she'd clung to since he found her later. As the sun dipped low and painted the sky with copper, she whispered, You think they're looking for me? Grim paused in the doorway, sharpening his knife. I'd say no one's gonna come this far out unless they know you're here. Joe stared at the fire for a moment. What if someone told? Grim frowned. Like who? She didn't answer, but her eyes didn't leave the flame. What neither of them knew was that someone had told. The bounty poster, hand-drawn, but specific, was no amateur's work. Sheriff Ellison found it at dawn and didn't like what it meant. He wrote out, To the shack under the pretense of checking on Grim. But the real reason was crumpled in his coat pocket. When Grim saw him approach, he came out with his rifle loosely in hand. Didn't expect visitors. Just checking on the girl, Ellison said. And you? Town too quiet? No, too noisy. The sheriff dismounted with a grunt and pulled the folded paper from his coat. Someone left this at my door. Grim took it, opened it, and stared at Joe's face, drawn just well enough to be her. And that bounty, $500, dead or alive. Who the hell would put a price on a kid? Grim muttered, jaw tight. Someone dangerous, and someone who knows she's alive. Inside, Joe listened. Every word. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at her hands. Grim folded the paper and shoved it in his coat. You tell anyone? No. Ellison said, Not yet. But I can't keep this quiet forever. If someone paid to have this drawn up, then they've got money, and money talks louder than I do. You do what you need to do, Sheriff. I'll do what I have to." Ellison gave him a long look, then nodded. "You always were stubborn." "Still am." The sheriff rode off, his horse kicking up a long trail of dust behind him. Grim walked back inside. Jo was sitting by the fire, unmoving. "You here?" She nodded. "You know why someone would want you dead?" Jo hesitated. "No. I don't think they wanted my family's wagon. I think they wanted me." Grim crouched beside her. "Why?" She took a shaky breath. "Before we left Kansas, Pa got a letter. It had a seal on it, red wax, looked like a snake coiled around a cross. He didn't let Ma see it, but I peeked. He burned it after reading." Grim stared. "That sounds like a mark, some kind of symbol. He said we had to leave fast, said there were people looking for us. I thought it was about money, but maybe it wasn't." Grim stood slowly, his mind ticking like a clock about to break. That letter might be why they came, and why they're still coming. Jo looked up. "Are you going to leave me now?" He met her eyes. Not a chance. That night, Grim didn't sleep. He sat by the door, rifle across his lap, ears tuned to the rustle of branches and the howl of coyotes. The fire burned low. Jo slept near it, curled up small, like she was trying to vanish into the floorboards. But out in the darkness, two men watched the shack from the tree line. One held a rifle. The other held a folded piece of paper with Jo's face on it. And they weren't here for the money. They were here to erase the past. The first shot came just before dawn. It cracked through the still morning like thunder, splittering with just inches from Grim McCall's head. He dove sideways, grabbing his rifle and rolling across the shack floor. Jo screamed and hit the ground as another bullet tore through the front wall, under the table. Grim shouted. She crawled fast, her blanket dragging behind her, heart hammering in her ears. Grim kicked open the back door and took cover behind the old woodpile. The forest beyond was dark, but movement caught his eye, shadows slipping between trees. Careful, practiced. These weren't drunk bandits or scared ranch hands. These were trained men, professionals. He fired once, hitting bark where one had ducked, then again. This time closer. A grunt answered him. Inside the shack, Jo covered her mouth and tried not to cry. Her body trembled. She reached down to the hem of her dress and pulled something out. A small cloth pouch, hidden in the seam. She hadn't told Grim. She hadn't told anyone. Inside was a coin. Not ordinary. Silver, but etched with the same snake and cross symbol that had been on her father's letter. It was warm in her hand, though it shouldn't have been. Outside, Grim knew he couldn't hold position long. He fired another shot and darted behind a stump. The attackers were circling. At least 3 of them, maybe more. Too many. Then he heard it. Hooves. Fast. A rider. No, 2. For a second he thought reinforcements were coming for the gunmen. But when he peeked out, he saw a familiar hat. Sheriff Ellison. Behind him, young Deputy Clyde, barely old enough to shave, held a shotgun and looked scared out of his mind. Grim used the distraction to flank right. He ran hard, ducked low, and fired again, this time hitting one of the attackers square in the chest. The man dropped silently. Ellison dismounted and took cover, returning fire. "You bring all this trouble, McCall. Wasn't me they came for." Grim shouted. "It's the girl." The final 2 attackers broke and ran, melting into the trees like smoke. Deputy Clyde chased one, but gave up when the man vanished over the ridge. The air went quiet again. Only the crackling of firewood from the hearth inside remained. Grim walked back in, gun still in hand. Jo crawled out from under the table, face pale. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "What were they after?" Sheriff Ellison asked. stepping through the wrecked doorway. No one sends hired killers after a little girl unless something big's at stake. Joe hesitated, then slowly opened her hand to reveal the silver coin. Both men leaned in. "That the same symbol from the letter?" Grim asked. She nodded. Ellison took off his hat, whistling low. "I've seen that before. Long time ago. Back in Missouri, there was a group, secret-like. Rich men, land barons. They called themselves the Coil, said they protected bloodlines, property, old secrets." Grim's face darkened. "You saying she's part of one of those bloodlines? Maybe. Or maybe her folks crossed M. Either way, that coin's a mark, a key." Joe looked up. "They're going to keep coming, aren't they?" Grim crouched beside her. "Yeah, but they ain't getting through me," Ellison sighed. "You'll need more than that. I've got friends down south, men who fought the same way you did. Some owe favors." Grim stood. "Then call them in." He turned to Joe. "You still got that fight in you." Joe didn't blink. "I never lost it." As the sun rose over the battered shack, 3 graves were dug near the edge of the trees. Grim buried the fallen attackers himself. No ceremony, just rocks on dirt. Then he sat on the porch steps and watched the horizon. Something bigger was coming. He could feel it in his bones. And for the first time in years, he wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting for someone. 2 days after the shootout, the shack had been reinforced. Sheriff Ellison sent extra firewood and a steel bolt for the door. Joe helped Grim nail shutters over the windows. Deputy Clyde rode night patrol with a nervous hand on his shotgun. But trouble doesn't ride loud. Trouble rides silent. That evening, Joe sat by the fire with the silver coin in her hand again. She hadn't told Grim everything. Not yet. "Grim," she said finally, "there's something else." He looked up from oiling his rifle. She stood and crossed the room, reaching under her mattress. From beneath a loose board, she pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. "This was in Pa's saddlebag. I took it before we ran." Grim opened the cloth. Inside was a weathered black book, its spine cracked, the pages edged in dust. At first glance, it looked like a diary, but when he opened it, he saw names. Hundreds of names, dates, symbols, dollar amounts. Grim frowned. "This is a ledger. Pa called it his insurance." Joe whispered. "He said if anything ever happened to him, I should hide it. Said people would come looking for it." Grim flipped to the last few pages. The same symbol, the snake and cross, was stamped next to certain names, landowners, sheriffs, even circuit judges, people who held power across 3 states. "Your father was part of the Coil," Grim muttered. "Or he was trying to expose them." Joe's voice trembled. "He used to meet men late at night, said they were planning something to stop it. But then he changed, got scared, said the group turned on itself." Grim looked at her. This ledger might be the only evidence they ever left behind. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Grim closed the book gently. "We're taking this to someone who can do something with it." Joe's eyes widened. Who? Grim stood. "Judge Wallace, retired circuit man. Lives 3 days south in a canyon called Firestone Hollow. He's one of the few I trust. But what if they follow? They will. Which is why we're not going through the main road. They left before first light." Grim rode with Joe in front, the ledger in a leather pouch tied under the saddle. They took the old cattle trails, winding through burnt grass, dry riverbeds, and forgotten canyons. Each night, they camped in silence, the fire small, the horses tied close. On the second night, they found a strange pile of stones stacked deliberately by a trail bend. "Message?" Joe asked. Grim studied it. More like a warning. He kicked the top stone. Inside the hollow center was another sketch. Joe's face again, but this time aged up, like someone was guessing what she'd look like in a few years. Beneath it were 3 words, The blood must end. Grim burned the note and scattered the stones. We're running out of time, he said. On the third day, near the border of Firestone Hollow, they found a man waiting on the trail, tall, coat flapping in the wind, black gloves, and a calm face like death itself. He held no gun, just a staff with a silver snake curled at the top. Grim pulled up. Who the hell are you? I am the one sent to retrieve the child and what she carries, the man said calmly. Joe gripped Grim's coat tighter. You can turn back, Grim said, or I can put you down. The man smiled. I've read every page of that ledger. I know every name. But the girl, she is the last proof. Grim drew his revolver, but the man only nodded. We will meet again. Not here, not now, but when the hour is right. He turned and walked into the canyon mist like he was swallowed by the earth itself. Joe stared after him. Was he even real? Grim holstered his weapon slowly. To real. By nightfall, they reached Judge Wallace's cabin, a solid stone house tucked into the cliffs. The old man opened the door with a shotgun in hand and a growl in his voice. But when he saw Joe and the ledger, his eyes widened. My God, he whispered, you found it. Grim nodded. We're gonna need more than justice, Judge. We need protection, and we need the truth. Judge Thaddeus Wallace was no ordinary man. He'd presided over trials that broke syndicates, jailed sheriffs, and once sentenced a railroad tycoon to hang, and lived to talk about it. Now, he stood in the glow of his stone fireplace, flipping through the pages of the ledger Joe's father had died to protect. His brow furrowed deeper with every name. Grim sat nearby, his rifle within reach. Joe sipped tea from a dented tin cup, eyes never leaving the judge's face. When Wallace finally shut the book, the room felt heavier. I thought this was lost, he said, voice gravelly. He said he'd never let it fall into the wrong hands. You knew Joe's father? Grim asked. Elias Bishop, smart man, brave too, used to be one of them Coil men. But he turned, said their vision got twisted, started keeping records, secrets they wanted buried. Why didn't he go public? They'd have killed him before the ink dried. He trusted me. I told him to run. Joe looked up. Why did they want me? Wallace stepped closer, kneeling beside her. Because you're the last blood heir to a land claim that sits on top of one of the biggest gold veins west of the Mississippi. Your family didn't even know, but the Coil did. They forged deeds, changed records. But if anyone found out you were alive and you had this ledger, their whole house of cards would collapse. Joe's eyes widened. So they tried to erase me. Wallace nodded. And they'll try again. Grim stood. So what do we do? Wallace turned toward a locked drawer, pulled out a leather folder, and laid it on the table. Inside were legal documents, seals, maps, and one powerful paper signed by the territorial governor 5 years ago. She has a claim. This proves it. But the only way it sticks is if we make it public. Open court, witnesses, journalists, Grim, paste. And while we wait for the wheels of justice, those devils will come to burn it all down. The judge gave a grim nod. That's why I sent a rider an hour ago. Old friends, men from the war. They'll come. The next day, the riders arrived. 7 in total, all hard-edged, weathered by battle, and carrying more scars than stories. Former rangers, retired bounty hunters. One of them, a native tracker named Elon, bowed to Joe and said, my people were wronged by Coil men too. We fight for justice. Joe looked up at Grim. They came for me. They came for what's right. The plan was simple, but deadly risky. They'd ride into Red Bluff, the county seat, and present Joe's claim in court. Wallace would testify. The ledger would be turned over to federal marshals. Journalists from San Francisco and Denver were already en route, thanks to Wallace's letters. The more public the fight, the harder it would be for the Coil to strike. From the shadows, but they all knew this wasn't going to be clean. "They'll come before the judge ever bangs the gavel," Grim said as they loaded rifles and saddled up. "They'll come with fire." Elan added, "Then we answer with truth." Wallace said. Joe didn't speak. She simply pulled the silver coin from her dress pocket and stared at it. Then, in a calm motion, she threw it into the fire. "I don't belong to them," she said. "Not anymore." Grim watched the coin melt, and for the first time, a flicker of pride crossed his weathered face. As they rode toward Red Bluff, dust rising behind them and rifles strapped to their saddles. The war wasn't just for one girl or one piece of land. It was for justice long denied. And the child the Coil thought they could silence was now riding at the front of an army. The air in Red Bluff was heavy with tension the morning they arrived. Word had spread. A child survivor, a judge, and a band of hard-riding men with enough firepower to hold off an army were coming. To put the Coil on trial, folks lined the dusty street, peeking from behind windows, whispering about the little girl whose name could bury the most powerful men. West of the Mississippi, Grim rode at the head, Joe in front of him, small hands gripping the saddle horn. Judge Wallace followed close behind, holding a folder stuffed with legal documents. The 7 riders fanned out like a living shield. No one dared block their path. At the courthouse steps, a crowd had gathered. Reporters scribbled in their notebooks. Townsfolk stared, and a few U.S. Marshals, summoned by telegram, waited with rifles ready. Grim helped Joe down and nodded. "Stay close." She nodded back, eyes steady, no more fear in them, only resolve. They climbed the steps together. Wallace pushed open the heavy oak doors, and the moment they entered, silence fell across the courtroom. The Coil's lawyer, a tall man with slick hair and dead eyes, rose from a bench, flanked by for-hire guns. "You can't just barge in here," the lawyer barked. "This is a lawful place." Wallace thundered back, "That's exactly why we're here. The law is finally coming home." He slapped the ledger down on the judge's bench, then laid out Joe's birth record, the territorial governor's grant, and the names of every bribe, every false deed, every secret meeting. Joe stepped forward, voice stronger than anyone expected from a child. "My father died to protect this. My mother too. You won't hide it anymore." The lawyer sneered. "That child is no heir. She's just a stray." Wallace slammed his hand on the bench. "This court will decide that, under federal protection." Then the shooting started. 2 of the Coil's men tried to draw, to slow. Grim dropped one with a single bullet. Elan took the other with a smooth throw of his tomahawk. Screams scattered the benches, but Joe stayed rooted to the floor, refusing to run. One of the marshals shielded her with his own body, returning fire as another gunman tried to rush the judge. Wallace never flinched, reading the child's claim aloud even as bullets chipped the plaster off the walls. "And let it be recorded for the territory and the Union that Joanna Bishop is rightful heir, and any challenge to this is challenge to the law itself." Grim kept firing until the room fell quiet again. Smoke thickened the beams of morning light. Joe's breathing was ragged, but she hadn't backed down. The federal judge, a thin, hawk-nosed man who'd arrived from Denver the night before, stepped forward, straightened his robes, and slammed down the gavel. "This claim is hereby recognized and protected by the federal government. Anyone interfering is subject to arrest or death on the spot." Cheers rose from the gallery. Folks who'd lived in fear of the Coil for decades realized in that moment it was finally over. Outside, townspeople gathered to see Joe descend the courthouse steps. She clutched Grim's hand so tight he thought she might break him, but he didn't mind. "You did real fine, Joe," he told her. She managed to smile. You too, Grim. Wallace came down behind them, looking older but lighter somehow. It'll be years of trials, appeals, claims, but the worst is done. She'll have guardians, schooling, and you, McCall, you ever thought about hanging up your spurs? Grim looked out over the street, sun beating down, dust rising, kids playing. He shook his head slowly. Reckon I'm better with a saddle under me, but I'll be around if she needs me. Joe looked up, determined as ever. You taught me to fight, Grim. I'll remember. He ruffled her hair. Don't let em change you. They left Red Bluff with applause ringing in their ears. Joe would live in town under the protection of the Marshalls and Wallace, building a life from the ashes of everything she'd lost. And Grim? He rode out that same afternoon, horse-trotting into the wide horizon. A free man again, but changed in ways he couldn't put words to. He'd saved a child, and she'd saved something in him too that no songs would be sung, no statues raised. But somewhere on the prairie, a legend had begun about a cowboy who took a lost girl's hand and refused to let the world swallow her whole, and that was more than enough.